Argentina, a land of breathtaking landscapes, vibrant culture, and rich history. But behind its picturesque mountains, vast plains, and bustling cities lie stories of terror that many would rather forget. Tonight on Creep, we delve into 3 chilling tales from Argentina. True or not, these stories have left those who experience them shaken to their core. From eerie encounters in the remote countryside to unexplained events in urban streets, these are stories that will make you question what's out there in the dark. Turn off the lights, settle in, and let's dive into the shadows of Argentina's haunting mysteries. It happened in the summer of 2003. I was driving along Route 40, one of the longest and most isolated highways in Argentina. I had been on a solo road trip through the Andes, enjoying the beauty of the rugged landscapes and the freedom of the open road. That stretch of Route 40 was barren. No towns, no gas stations, just endless desert on either side and mountains looming in the distance. It was late afternoon when I saw her. She was standing on the side of the road, her thumb outstretched, a small backpack slung over her shoulder. She looked young, maybe in her early 20s, and wore a plain white dress. I hesitated for a moment. Picking up a stranger on an empty highway isn't exactly the safest decision, but something about her seemed desperate. I slowed the car, rolled down the window, and asked if she needed a ride. She nodded silently and climbed into the passenger seat without saying a word. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to sound friendly. She didn't answer. She just looked straight ahead, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I figured she might be shy or nervous, so I didn't push her. Instead, I focused on the road, occasionally glancing over at her. She sat perfectly still, staring out the windshield, not once looking at me or anything else around us. As the sun began to set, the landscape turned a deep orange, and the shadows stretched across the road. The silence in the car was suffocating. I tried to make small talk, asking where she was from, why she was traveling alone, but she didn't respond. After a while, I started to feel uneasy. Her silence wasn't just awkward, it was unnatural. I glanced at her again and noticed something I hadn't before. Her dress was torn at the hem, and her shoes were caked in dry mud. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice faltering. This time, she turned her head slightly toward me. For a brief moment, I thought she might answer, but instead, she just stared at me with a blank expression, her eyes dark and empty. I felt a chill run down my spine. I decided to stop at the next town, which was still about 30 kilometers away. I didn't want to be alone with her any longer than I had to be. That's when the strange things started happening. The radio, which I'd left off, crackled to life on its own. At first, it was just static, but then a faint, distorted voice came through, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. I turned it off, but the static kept going. The temperature in the car dropped sharply, even though it was still warm outside. I could see my breath fogging up in the cold. And then she laughed. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was quiet, almost a giggle, but it sent a wave of terror through me. I turned to look at her, but she was gone. The passenger seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt in the middle of the deserted highway. My heart was racing as I frantically looked around, but there was no sign of her anywhere. The passenger door had never opened. She couldn't have just disappeared, could she? I drove to the next town as fast as I could, barely stopping for anything. When I got there, I went straight to a small cafe and told the locals what had happened. They exchanged uneasy glances before one of them spoke up. "You're not the first to see her," he said. "That's the hitchhiker of Route 40. She's been seen for decades. Some say she's a lost soul, looking for a way out. Others say she died in a crash years ago and doesn't realize she's gone. I didn't sleep that night. To this day, I can still hear her laugh echoing in my ears when I think about that drive. And if you ever find yourself on Route 40, driving through the endless desert, just keep going. Don't stop for anyone. You never know who or what you might let into your car. It was in 1998 when I moved to Buenos Aires to attend university. I found a small, affordable apartment on a quiet street near Recoleta Cemetery. The place had charm, a little old and creaky, but nothing out of the ordinary for a historic part of the city. I was alone in the city, away from family and friends, but the neighborhood felt safe. That comfort wouldn't last. The strange occurrences started a few weeks after I moved in. At first, it was small things. Lights flickering, the faucet dripping even after I was sure I'd turned it off. I chalked it up to the age of the building. But then came the whispers. It started late at night, around 2 or 3 in the morning. I'd be lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I'd hear faint voices. At first, I thought it was the neighbors, but the sound didn't come from the walls. It was closer, like someone was murmuring right next to my ear. I couldn't make out the words. It was more like a soft, rhythmic chant, rising and falling in tone. I'd get up to investigate, but the whispers would stop the moment I turned on the lights. My apartment would be completely silent, the kind of silence that felt heavy, oppressive. One night, I decided to stay awake and see if I could figure out what was happening. I turned off all the lights and sat in my living room, waiting. Around 2:30 a.m., the whispers began again. This time, I could tell they were coming from the walls. I pressed my ear against the plaster, and the sound grew louder. It wasn't just one voice. It was several overlapping, like a crowd whispering in unison. My heart pounded as I tried to make out the words, but they were in a language I didn't recognize. And then I heard my name, Lucia. It was clear, unmistakable. My blood ran cold, and I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the coffee table. I didn't stay in the living room that night. Over the next few days, the activity escalated. Doors would slam shut on their own. My belongings would be moved to strange places. Once, I found my kitchen knives arranged in a perfect circle on the counter. I started asking around about the building's history. An elderly woman at a nearby cafe told me the apartment complex had been built over an old morgue. During a cholera outbreak in the 1800s, hundreds of bodies had been stored there temporarily because the city's cemeteries were overwhelmed. "You shouldn't live there," she said, her voice trembling. "The dead don't like to be disturbed." I tried to shrug it off, but the whispers kept coming. They were louder now, more insistent. One night, I woke up to find my bedroom door wide open, even though I was certain I'd locked it. And then I saw it. Standing in the doorway was a shadow, a tall, humanoid figure. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, its presence suffocating. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes on me. I was paralyzed with fear. Finally, I mustered the courage to reach for the lamp on my bedside table. The moment I turned on the light, the shadow was gone. That was the last straw. The next morning, I packed up my things and moved out. I didn't care about breaking the lease or losing my deposit. I just wanted to get away from that place. Even now, years later, I can't walk past Recoleta Cemetery without feeling a chill. I've never told anyone else about what happened in that apartment, but sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear those whispers in my dreams. If you ever visit Buenos Aires, enjoy its beauty and history, but be careful where you stay. Some places hold on to the past a little too tightly, and they might not want to let you go. It was late March 2020, just as the world seemed to be falling apart with the pandemic. I had returned to Cordoba from Buenos Aires to be closer to my family. The city streets were eerily quiet, with the lockdown in full effect. Shops were closed, people stayed indoors, and the world felt frozen. I was staying with my best friend, Martin, in his small apartment on the outskirts of the city. We had grown up together, closer than brothers, and decided to ride out the isolation together. The nights were long, but we made do, watching movies, drinking cheap wine, and reminiscing about simpler times. One night, everything changed. It started with a knock at the door. It was almost midnight, and we weren't expecting anyone. Martin froze, his eyes darting to me. "Did you invite someone over?" he whispered. I shook my head. The knocking came again, harder this time. Martin approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. "There's no one there," he said, his voice uneasy. The moment he said it, the knocking stopped. We laughed it off, attributing it to someone playing a prank, but there was something off about the whole thing. The air in the apartment felt heavy, oppressive, like we were being watched. Around 2 a.m., Martin decided to go to bed. I stayed up a little longer, scrolling through my phone in the dim light of the living room. That's when I heard the sound. It was faint at first, like a soft rustling. Then it grew louder, a scraping noise, like nails dragging across the floor. It was coming from Martin's room. I called out to him, but there was no response. The noise stopped abruptly, and an unnatural silence filled the apartment. My gut told me something was wrong. I got up and walked toward his room, each step feeling heavier than the last. The door was slightly ajar, and a sliver of darkness seeped through the crack. "Martin?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I pushed the door open, and what I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. Martin was lying on his bed, his body contorted in a way that no living person could manage. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, his face frozen in an expression of sheer terror. His throat had been slit, the blood pooling around him, soaking the mattress. But that wasn't the worst part. Standing at the foot of the bed was a figure, a man, but not quite. He was tall, his limbs unnaturally long, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. His face was obscured by shadows, but I could feel his eyes on me, piercing and inhuman. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was stand there, paralyzed, as the figure slowly turned its head toward me. It didn't speak, but I swear I heard a voice in my head, low and guttural. "Leave," and then it was gone. I don't remember running out of the apartment. I don't remember calling the police. The next thing I knew, I was sitting on the curb outside, trembling, tears streaming down my face as the sound of sirens filled the air. The authorities ruled Martin's death as a homicide, but they never found a suspect. The case remains unsolved to this day. I left Cordoba shortly after, unable to bear the memories of that night. I've tried to move on, to convince myself that what I saw wasn't real, that it was a shock or the fear playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I know the truth. There are things in this world that can't be explained, things that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And sometimes, they take the ones we love most. And there you have it. 3 chilling tales from Argentina. Stories that remind us of the fragility of safety and the mysteries lurking in the shadows of our everyday lives. From eerie encounters in the countryside to unspeakable horrors in the heart of Cordoba, these accounts show that fear knows no boundaries. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Creep for more unsettling tales from around the world. And if you've experienced something strange or terrifying yourself, we'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe and remember, sometimes reality is scarier than fiction.